The first autumn leaves were drifting down outside the tall windows of Westfield Conservatory as May Wong straightened the sheet music on her desk. The sounds of students practicing floated through the hallways, a violin here, a flute there, and of course, the constant melody of piano keys from various practice rooms. Mai had been teaching piano at the conservatory for almost 15 years. At 42, she had made quite a name for herself. Once a child prodigy who had performed in concert halls across Asia and Europe, she now molded the next generation of musicians with exacting standards and little patience for mediocrity. Professor Wong. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Mai looked up to see a young man standing awkwardly in the doorway of her classroom. His brown hair needed a trim, and his wrinkled button-up shirt was half-tucked into faded jeans. He clutched a worn backpack against his chest like a shield. Yes, she replied, not bothering to hide her impatience. Her advanced piano students would be arriving any minute, and she had no time for distractions. I'm Tom Wilson. I'm supposed to be in your advanced piano techniques class. His statement rose at the end, becoming a question. Mai frowned and checked her roster. There must be some mistake. I don't have anyone named Tom Wilson on my list. The young man stepped forward, fumbling with his phone to show her an email. The administration just added me yesterday. See? May squinted at the screen. Indeed, there was his name, officially enrolled in her most prestigious class. This can't be right, she muttered. This class is for our most accomplished pianists. You need at least 5 years of conservatory training to qualify. Tom shifted uncomfortably. I know it seems weird. I'm actually a computer science major, but I needed an arts elective, and there was some mix-up with my previous music credits from high school. By now, other students had begun filing into the classroom. Mai noticed several of them eyeing Tom with curiosity and, in some cases, amusement. His casual attire stood out sharply against their more formal clothes. You've studied piano before? Mai asked, her tone making it clear what answer she expected. Well, yes. I took lessons as a kid, from about age 7 to 14. Tom's voice grew quieter with each word. A few students exchanged glances. One girl with perfectly coiffed hair didn't bother hiding her smile. 7 years of childhood lessons does not qualify you for advanced piano techniques, Mai said firmly. This class prepares students for professional careers. We're currently working on Liszt and Rachmaninoff. Perhaps you should speak with the administration about a beginner or intermediate class instead. A titter of laughter rippled through the now full classroom. The girl with the perfect hair whispered something to her neighbor, who nodded in agreement. Tom's face flushed red. I understand, but the administration said all the other classes are full, and I really need an arts credit this semester to stay on track for graduation. Mai sighed dramatically. Very well, you may observe today, but I strongly recommend you find another option. I won't slow down my curriculum for someone who hasn't touched a piano since middle school. More laughter followed, less restrained this time. Tom slipped into an empty seat in the back row, trying to make himself as small as possible. Today we continue with Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, Mai announced to the class, effectively dismissing Tom's presence. Lily, since you struggled with the middle section last time, why don't you demonstrate your progress? A confident young woman approached the grand piano at the front of the room. As she played, Mai occasionally glanced at Tom in the back. He was taking notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a moment, she felt a twinge of guilt for embarrassing him, but quickly pushed it aside. The conservatory had standards after all, and she was doing him a favor by being honest. What she didn't notice was how Tom's fingers moved slightly on his desk, mirroring the complex fingerings of Rachmaninoff's challenging piece, or how his eyes followed each movement of Lily's hands with unusual intensity. When class ended, the students filed out, several of them still chuckling about the computer nerd who thought he could hang with the musicians. Tom lingered, waiting until everyone had left before approaching Mai's desk. Thank you for letting me stay, he said quietly. I'll be back on Wednesday. Before Mai could respond, he was gone, leaving her slightly puzzled by his persistence in the face of such obvious humiliation. Little did she know that Tom Wilson was about to change everything she thought she knew about talent, music, and judging books by their covers. For 2 weeks, Tom showed up to every class right on time. He always sat in the back row, took detailed notes, and never said a word unless May directly asked him a question, which she rarely did. October rain tapped against the windows as May demonstrated proper wrist technique for a particularly difficult passage in Chopin's Winter Wind etude. She glanced up occasionally, noticing how Tom's eyes followed her hands with unusual focus. Unlike some of her students who checked their phones when they thought she wasn't looking, Tom seemed genuinely absorbed in everything she said. Still, she never asked him to play. In her mind, he remained the computer science student who had somehow slipped through administrative cracks into her advanced class. Remember, May told her students as class ended, your midterm assignment is to prepare a piece with a partner. You'll be graded on your collaborative skills as well as technical execution. Partners will be assigned tomorrow. The next day, May posted the partner list on the classroom door. Students gathered around, some pleased with their assignments, others less so. Lily Chen, one of May's star pupils, marched straight to her desk after reading the list. Professor Wang, there must be a mistake, Lily said, her perfectly manicured finger tapping against the paper in her hand. You've paired me with him. She jerked her head toward the back of the room where Tom sat quietly reviewing his notes. There's no mistake, May replied calmly, though privately she wondered if she had been too harsh in her pairing. Lily was technically brilliant but notoriously difficult to work with. Perhaps pairing her with Tom would teach her some patience. But he doesn't even play. Lily's voice rose, loud enough for everyone to hear. How am I supposed to prepare a duet with someone who can't contribute? Heads turned toward Tom. His cheeks flushed red, but he kept his eyes down, pretending to be absorbed in his notebook. May felt a twinge of regret. Maybe this was too cruel. Lily, part of being a professional musician is adapting to challenging situations. Consider this good practice. For what? Lily scoffed. My future career playing with amateurs? Several students laughed. Tom's shoulders hunched forward slightly, but otherwise he showed no reaction. May sighed. The assignments stand. You have 3 weeks to prepare. After class, May overheard Lily confronting Tom in the hallway. Look, Lily said, I need this grade. I have a scholarship to maintain. So here's what we'll do. I'll prepare the piece, and you'll just pretend to play. Keep your volume down, and I'll carry us through. I don't think that's what Professor Wang intended, Tom replied quietly. Do you have a better idea? Because I'm not letting you ruin my GPA. May should have intervened, but curiosity kept her silent. What would the young man do? What if? Tom hesitated. What if I practice the part? Give me a week with the music. If I can't play it by then, we'll do it your way. Lily laughed. You think you can learn a piece in a week that took me years of training to master? Tom shrugged. Just a week. That's all I'm asking. Fine, it's your funeral. Lily thrust a folder of sheet music at him. Rehearsal Room City, next Tuesday, 4 p.m. Don't waste my time. As the days passed, May noticed something strange. The practice room's sign-up sheets showed Tom's name in late-night slots, midnight to 2 a.m., times when most students were asleep. She wondered if he was actually practicing or just putting on a show of effort. One evening, May stayed late grading papers. At nearly midnight, she decided to head home, taking a shortcut through the practice room hallway. Most rooms were dark, but a faint light spilled from under the door of room H at the far end. As she approached, she heard soft, halting piano notes. Someone was practicing the second part of Schubert's Fantasia in F minor, the very piece she had assigned to Lily and Tom. The playing was slow, methodical, with occasional stops and restarts. Not the fluid performance of an accomplished pianist, but not the fumbling of a beginner either. Curiously, May peeked through the small window in the door. Tom sat at the piano, his back straight, fingers moving carefully over the keys. Beside him lay his open laptop showing a video tutorial, and the sheet music was marked with penciled notes. As she watched, he replayed a difficult passage 3 times, each attempt smoother than the last. She stepped back, oddly unsettled. The boy was actually trying, really trying. The following Tuesday, May found herself walking past Rehearsal Room City just as Lily and Tom were scheduled to meet. She slowed her pace, telling herself she was just checking on her students' progress. You're late, she heard Lily snap through the door. Sorry, my programming lab ran over, Tom replied. Whatever. Let's just get this over with. Did you even look at the music? I did. Well then, miracle of miracles, let's hear what you've got. There was a brief silence, then the sound of the piano bench creaking as someone sat down. May held her breath, expecting disaster. Instead, she heard the opening notes of Schubert's Fantasia, played slowly but accurately, with surprising attention to dynamic markings. The music stopped abruptly. Wait, Lily's voice had lost its edge. You can actually play. I told you I took lessons as a kid. But this isn't Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. This is Schubert. I've been practicing, Tom said simply. Clearly, Lily replied, her tone now curious rather than dismissive. Your tempo's too slow, and your phrasing needs work, but it's not terrible. May backed away from the door, a small smile forming on her lips. Perhaps there was more to Tom Wilson than met the eye. And maybe, just maybe, she had been too quick to judge. November brought an early snowfall to Westfield Conservatory. White flakes drifted past the windows as May sat in her office, staring at an email that had ruined her evening plans. Professor Wong. The department secretary poked her head through the doorway. I just wanted to make sure you saw the message about Mr. Yoshida. May nodded stiffly. I saw it. Thank you, Rita. When the secretary left, May turned back to her computer screen. Renowned pianist Hiroshi Yoshida had cancelled his appearance at next week's donor gala due to a sudden illness. As the head of the piano department, it fell on May to find a replacement fast. She rubbed her temples. The gala was the conservatory's biggest fundraising event of the year. Wealthy patrons would be expecting an impressive performance, and now she had just 7 days to deliver one. Most of the faculty were already committed to other events, and asking a student to perform was risky. Lily would be the obvious choice, but she had frozen during last year's spring recital. Mai couldn't take that chance again with Dunners watching. It was nearly midnight when Mai finally locked her office. The hallways were dark and quiet as she headed toward the exit, but as she passed the practice rooms, a faint melody caught her attention. Someone was playing Chopin's Baladno, one in G minor, one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire. The performance wasn't perfect, but it had something many technically proficient students lacked: genuine emotion. The player wasn't just hitting the right notes, they were telling a story. Curious, Mai followed the sound to practice room F at the end of the hall. The small window in the door revealed a familiar figure hunched over the keys, Tom Wilson, the computer science student who supposedly couldn't play. But he could play, very well, in fact. May stood transfixed as Tom navigated the piece's difficult runs and arpeggios. His technique wasn't flawless. Occasionally his fingers stumbled over the most demanding passages, but his interpretation had a raw, honest quality that made the small hairs on May's arms stand up. She had taught students with perfect technique who never managed to capture what Tom was creating now. When he reached the thunderous coda, Tom's entire body seemed to transform. Gone was the shy, awkward young man who slumped in the back of her classroom. In his place sat a passionate musician, completely lost in the music, his fingers flying across the keyboard with surprising agility and strength. As the final notes faded, May watched Tom drop his hands into his lap and take a deep breath. He sat motionless for several seconds, as if returning to reality from somewhere far away. Without thinking, May pushed the door open. Tom jumped at the sound, spinning around on the bench. Professor Wong. I'm sorry, I know it's late, but the room was reserved and... How long? May interrupted. Excuse me. How long have you been playing like that? She gestured to the piano. Tom looked down. I never really stopped, I guess. My parents wanted me to focus on something practical, so I majored in computer science. But I kept playing whenever I could find a piano. Who taught you? My grandmother, at first. She was a concert pianist in China before she immigrated. After she died, I had a few different teachers, but nobody special. Mai frowned. That's Chopin's first ballade. It's one of the most technically demanding pieces in the repertoire. Tom shrugged. I know I make mistakes. The middle section still gives me trouble, and my left hand gets tired during. Why are you in my class? May cut him off again. Tom looked startled by the question. I told you, there was a mix-up with my aunt's credit and... No. May shook her head. I mean, why are you sitting in the back? Taking notes when you can play like this? Why didn't you tell me? A flash of something, hurt, perhaps, crossed Tom's face. I tried to tell you on the first day. You laughed at me. Everyone laughed at me. The memory of that first class hit May like a physical blow. She had dismissed him completely, hadn't even given him a chance to demonstrate his abilities. Play something else, she said. Now? Yes, now. Tom turned back to the piano, thought for a moment, then began Debussy's Clair de Lune. The delicate, floating notes filled the small room, creating an almost magical atmosphere. His touch was surprisingly sensitive for someone with such large hands. When he finished, May had made up her mind. Mr. Wilson, she said formally, how would you feel about performing at the conservatory's Dono Gala next Friday evening? Tom's eyes widened in shock. You're joking. I never joke about music. But all your amazing students, Lily and will be in the audience, May finished for him, watching you play. Tom stared at Professor Wong like she had just suggested he fly to the moon. The Dono Gala? You can't be serious. Do I look like I'm joking? May crossed her arms. But those are all important people, board members, wealthy donors. They're expecting someone. Tom trailed off. Someone what? May raised an eyebrow. Someone better than me. Tom looked down at his hands. I'm just a computer science student who plays in practice rooms at midnight. May pulled over a chair and sat down. For the first time, she really looked at Tom, not as an inconvenience or a misplaced student, but as a person. His brown eyes held a depth she hadn't noticed before, and there was something about the way he spoke about music that reminded her of herself at his age. Mr. Wilson, Tom, I wouldn't ask if I didn't think you could do it. Her voice was gentler than usual. What I just heard was real music, not just notes on a page. Tom ran his fingers through his hair. I make mistakes, technical mistakes. So did Horowitz. I'm not Horowitz, Tom laughed nervously. No, you're Tom Wilson, and you play with something many of my perfect students lack, heart. The practice room fell silent except for the soft hum of the heating system. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the campus in white. I haven't performed in front of an audience since my grandmother's funeral 5 years ago, Tom finally said. I played her favorite Chopin nocturne. May nodded, understanding the significance. And how did that feel? Terrifying. But also right somehow, like she could hear me. The gala is next Friday. That gives us a week to prepare. May stood up. If you're willing to try, I'm willing to help you. Tom looked up, surprise clear on his face. You would coach me. Every day until the performance. We'll start tomorrow. She checked her watch. Or rather today, it's already past midnight. What about your regular classes? I'll make time. May gathered her coat and bag. Be at my office at 4 o'clock, and bring your repertoire ideas. We'll need to choose pieces that showcase your strengths. As she reached the door, Tom called out, Professor Wong, why are you doing this? A week ago, you wouldn't even look at me during class. May paused, her hand on the doorknob. Because I was wrong about you, she said simply. And I don't like being wrong. Word spread quickly throughout the conservatory. By lunchtime the next day, everyone knew that Tom Wilson, the computer guy who had crushed Professor Wong's advanced class, would be replacing Hiroshi Yoshida at the Dono Gala. Lily cornered Tom in the cafeteria. Is it true? You're performing at the gala? Tom nodded, poking at his sandwich without looking up. Are you insane? Those people donate millions to the school. If you mess up, she let the thought hang in the air. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Tom muttered. Lily sat down across from him. It's not about confidence. It's about experience. You might be decent at playing when no one's watching, but performing is different. The pressure gets to everyone. Even you? Tom asked. Lily's cheeks flushed. Last year's spring recital was different. I was sick. Right. Look, Lily leaned forward, lowering her voice. Professor Wong is using you to avoid asking me. She knows what happened last time, and she doesn't trust me anymore. But this affects all of us. The piano department's funding depends on these donors. I didn't ask for this, Tom said. She heard me playing last night and made the decision. Lily's expression changed from annoyed to curious. What were you playing? Chopin's First Ballade. She let out a low whistle. Ambitious. My grandmother taught me, before she died. Something in Lily's face softened. My mother taught me. She still criticizes every performance. For the first time, Tom felt like he was seeing the real person behind Lily's perfect appearance and cutting remarks. Professor Wong is coaching me every day until the gala, Tom said. I'm meeting her at 4. Lily stood up, gathering her things. Don't waste her time. She's the best teacher in this place, even if she can be harsh. I know. Lily hesitated, then added, your octaves in the Schubert were sloppy. Work on that. She walked away before Tom could respond. At exactly 4 o'clock, Tom knocked on Professor Wong's office door. Come in, May called. Her office was smaller than Tom had expected, with walls lined with books and framed concert programs. A baby grand piano took up most of the space, leaving just enough room for a desk and 2 chairs. Let's not waste time, May said, closing the score she'd been studying. Have you thought about your program? Tom nodded and handed her a piece of paper. May scanned the list with a critical eye. Ambitious, she said, but not impossible. Sit. She pointed to the piano bench. For the next 2 hours, May drilled Tom on technique, stopping him every few measures to correct his fingering or phrasing. She was demanding but not unkind, and Tom absorbed her instructions like a sponge. As dusk fell outside the window, May finally said, enough for today, your hands need rest. Tom flexed his fingers, which were stiff from playing. Can I ask you something? You just did, but go ahead. Why did you become a teacher? You could still be performing. May looked surprised by the question. No student had ever asked her that before. I performed for 20 years, she said after a moment. But I found that helping others discover their voice at the piano became more meaningful than having audiences hear mine. She paused. That's why this job matters to me. Finding and nurturing real talent. Even when it shows up in your class by accident. Tom smiled slightly. Especially then, May replied, returning his smile with a small one of her own. Now go get some rest. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow. The days before the gala flew by in a blur of practice sessions, technical exercises, and cups of strong coffee. Tom's fingers had never worked so hard in his life. Every afternoon at 4, he'd meet Professor Wong in her office, and they wouldn't stop until well past dinner time. Again, May said, pointing to a difficult passage in Liszt's Un Sospiro. It was Thursday afternoon, just 1 day before the performance. Your left hand is dragging. Tom wiped sweat from his forehead and repositioned his hands. The Liszt piece required crossing hands rapidly, creating the illusion that the rolling arpeggios were being played by more than 2 hands. He'd been working on this particular section for over an hour. I know it's difficult, May said, noticing his frustration, but this is the showpiece of your program. It needs to sparkle. I've been practicing it for 3 hours every night, Tom admitted. Show me your hands. Tom held them out. Small red marks had formed where his fingers had been striking the keys. May frowned. You're pushing too hard. The piano is not your enemy, Tom. You don't need to fight it. It feels like my enemy right now, he muttered. To his surprise, May laughed, a genuine laugh he'd never heard from her before. I said the same thing to my teacher once when I was preparing for my first major competition. What did your teacher say back? She told me to go for a walk, so that's what we're going to do. May stood up and grabbed her coat from the rack. Tom blinked in confusion, but we still have an hour left. Your mind is tired, which means your fingers will make the same mistakes over and over. Come on. Reluctantly, Tom followed her out of the building. The campus was quiet, with most students already gone for the upcoming weekend. Snow crunched beneath their feet as they walked in silence. When I was 19, May said suddenly, I was preparing for the International Chopin competition. I practiced 16 hours a day for months. 2 weeks before the competition, I couldn't play a simple scale without making mistakes. What happened? Tom asked. My teacher forced me to take 3 days off. No piano, no music, nothing. I thought she was crazy, but when I came back to the instrument, May smiled at the memory. Everything fell into place. Sometimes our brains need space to process what we've learned. They'd reached a small pond at the edge of campus. The surface was frozen, reflecting the late afternoon sun. I have a confession to make, Tom said, breaking the silence. I lied about why I'm in your class. May raised an eyebrow. Oh? There wasn't really an administrative error. I requested your class specifically. Why would you do that when there were more appropriate levels available? Tom kicked at the snow with his boot. I've been following your career since I was 15. My grandmother showed me a recording of your performance at Carnegie Hall, the old Chopin program. She said, that's how those pieces should sound. May looked genuinely surprised. That was almost 20 years ago. When I saw your name in the course catalog, I thought, I don't know. I guess I thought maybe I could learn something from you, even if I just sat in the back and took notes. Why didn't you tell me this before? Tom shrugged. Would it have made a difference that first day? A computer science major claiming to be a fan. Me didn't answer immediately. She stared out at the frozen pond, thinking. I've been unfair to you, she finally said, and to many students over the years. I became so focused on technical perfection that I forgot why most of us start playing in the first place, for the love of it. She turned to face him. You remind me of that every time you play. Even with the mistakes, there's a joy in your music that many of my perfect students lack. Tom felt his face grow warm, and it wasn't from the cold. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The gala is tomorrow, and we still have work to do. But her voice had lost its edge. One more hour of practice, then you rest. Doctor's orders. As they walked back toward the music building, Tom asked, Professor Wong, what if I freeze up tomorrow? What if I let everyone down? Then you'll have a story to tell, May said simply. But I don't think that's going to happen. How can you be so sure? Because I've seen how you play when you think no one is listening. She gave him a knowing look. Tomorrow, just pretend you're in practice room F at midnight, playing for your grandmother. Back in her office, May watched Tom work through the list one more time. His playing had changed since their walk. It was lighter, more fluid, as if a weight had been lifted. When he finished, she nodded in approval. Much better. Now your batch is solid, your Debussy is expressive, and your list is... She paused, searching for the right word, coming along. What about your own piece? The final part of Tom's program was his own composition, a bold choice that May had surprisingly supported. I'm still tweaking it, Tom admitted. The middle section doesn't flow right. Let me hear what you have. Tom took a deep breath and began to play. The piece started simply, almost like a lullaby, before growing into something more complex and modern. It incorporated elements of classical piano with hints of jazz and even some sub-electronic music influences, reflecting both his traditional training and contemporary interests. When he reached the troublesome middle section, his fingers hesitated. Don't stop, May encouraged. Play through the rough parts. Tom pushed on, working through the awkward transition. As he played the final notes, he looked up nervously. The melody in the middle needs to be stronger, May said. Right now it's hiding behind those chord progressions. Don't be afraid to let it sing. I'll work on it tonight. Not too late, May warned. I need you rested for tomorrow. The gala starts at 7, but I want you there at 5 for sound check. She handed him a garment bag that had been hanging on her coat rack. And wear this. What is it? My son's concert suit. He's about your size. He outgrew it last year. Tom was taken aback. You have a son? May smiled slightly. Is that so surprising? He's studying engineering at MIT. Never had any interest in music, despite my best efforts. As Tom gathered his sheet music, May added, one more thing. I've invited someone to watch you tomorrow. A friend who teaches at the Manhattan School of Music. He's always looking for talented pianists, regardless of their major. Tom stared at her. Are you serious? Completely. Now go rest those hands. Tomorrow is your moment. As Tom left the office, clutching the garment bag, he felt a strange mix of terror and excitement. In just 24 hours, he would either make the biggest mistake of his life or discover something about himself he never knew was possible. The grand ballroom of the Henderson Hotel buzzed with conversation. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns mingled, champagne glasses in hand. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering of Westfield Conservatory's most important supporters and wealthiest donors. In a small room behind the stage, Tom adjusted his borrowed suit jacket for the 10th time. The sleeves were slightly too short, exposing more of his wrists than he would have liked. His stomach felt like it was filled with angry butterflies. "Stop fidgeting," Professor Wong said as she entered the green room. She wore a floor-length black dress that transformed her from strict teacher to elegant performer. "You'll wrinkle the suit." "Sorry," Tom mumbled. "I think I'm going to be sick." "Breathe." Mai placed a hand on his shoulder. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." Tom followed her instructions, trying to calm his racing heart. "I saw the program," he said between breaths. "They'd printed Thomas Wilson instead of just Tom." "Thomas sounds more distinguished." "It sounds like someone who knows what they're doing. Someone who isn't going to embarrass themselves in front of half the city's millionaires." May regarded him carefully, having second thoughts. Fourth and fifth thoughts, actually. Tom ran a hand through his hair, immediately messing up what little styling he'd managed earlier. "Listen to me." May's voice was firm but kind. "In a few minutes, you're going to walk onto that stage. Some people out there will be expecting to see the famous Hiroshi Yoshida. They'll be disappointed. Others will be curious about the last-minute replacement." "Not helping," Tom groaned. "I'm not finished," Mai continued. "None of that matters. The moment you touch those keys, the only thing that should exist for you is the music. Not the audience, not the critics, not even me. Just you and the piano having a conversation that everyone else is privileged to overhear." A stagehand knocked on the door. "5 minutes, Mr. Wilson." When the door closed, Tom looked at May with panic in his eyes. "I can't remember the first note of the Bach." "Yes, you can." She hummed it softly. "Right." Tom nodded, the note unlocking the rest of the piece in his memory. "Professor Wong, thank you for everything. Save your thanks for after the performance." But she smiled slightly. "Now, one last piece of advice my teacher gave me before my debut. Imagine everyone in the audience in their underwear." Tom laughed nervously. "Does that actually work?" "No, it's terrible advice. I was so distracted trying not to picture my elderly relatives in their underwear that I completely forgot to be nervous." She checked her watch. "It's time. Remember, the piano is your friend, not your enemy." The audience applauded politely as the dean of the conservatory introduced a promising young talent from our piano department, Thomas Wilson. A few puzzled whispers rippled through the crowd when Tom walked onto the stage instead of the famous pianist they had expected. From his seat in the front row, Professor Chen, head of the string department, leaned toward Lily, who sat beside him. "Isn't that the computer science student from your class?" Lily nodded, her expression unreadable. On stage, Tom approached the gleaming 9-foot concert grand. He adjusted the bench, flexed his fingers, and took a deep breath. The audience seemed impossibly large from where he sat, their faces blurring together under the bright lights. In the wings, May watched, her hands clasped tightly together. Next to her stood a distinguished-looking man she had introduced earlier as David Levine from the Manhattan School of Music. Tom placed his hands on the keys. For a terrifying moment, his mind went completely blank. He couldn't remember a single note of any piece he had prepared. Then, from somewhere in his memory, he heard his grandmother's voice. "The music is already inside you. Your fingers just need to find it." Tom closed his eyes and began to play. The Bach prelude flowed from his fingers like water, clean, precise, and measured. He had chosen it as an opener to establish his technical foundation, to show that he understood the classics. As the last notes faded, there was a moment of silence before polite applause. Without pausing, he moved directly into Debussy's Clair de Lune. This was when something began to change in the room. The impressionistic piece, with its dreamy quality and delicate phrasing, created an almost visible shift in the atmosphere. People who had been sipping champagne or checking their phones now looked up, their attention captured. From the wings, May nodded in approval. Tom was playing better than he ever had in their practice sessions. Each phrase breathed naturally, as if the music were a living thing. When he finished the Debussy, the applause was warmer, more enthusiastic. Tom looked briefly toward the wings where May stood. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. Now came the test. Liszt's Un Sospiro, the technical showpiece. Tom took a deep breath and plunged in. The cascade of arpeggios filled the hall, his hands crossing and recrossing in the complex pattern they had practiced for hours. When he reached the passage that had given him so much trouble, his left hand cooperated perfectly, creating the illusion that more than two hands were playing. A few audience members exchanged impressed glances. This was not what they had expected from a last-minute replacement. In the front row, Lely sat forward in her seat, eyes wide. She had never heard Tom play like this before. Professor Chen whispered something to her, but she shushed him, not wanting to miss a note. As the list came to its dramatic conclusion, the audience burst into genuine applause. Tom wiped his brow quickly, catching his breath before the final piece, his own composition. "For my final selection," he said into the microphone, his voice surprisingly steady, "I'd like to play something I composed for my grandmother, who taught me that music is more than just notes on a page." He began with the simple, lullaby-like melody he had played for May the day before. But something was different now. Following her advice, he had reworked the troublesome middle section overnight, letting the melody shine through more clearly. The piece told the story, his story, of someone caught between two worlds, the practical and the passionate, the expected and the desired. As it built to its conclusion, Tom poured everything he had into the keys, all the late nights in practice rooms, all the moments of doubt, all the joy he felt when playing just for himself. When the final chord faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the ballroom erupted in applause. People stood from their seats, smiling and clapping enthusiastically. Tom rose from the bench, his legs shaky beneath him. He bowed awkwardly, then again with more confidence as the applause continued. In the wings, David Levine turned to May with raised eyebrows. "You said he was a computer science major." May nodded, unable to hide her proud smile. "With a minor in surprising people." "Well, he's certainly done that." Levin handed her his card. "Have him call me next week. We should talk about his future." As Tom took a third bow, his eyes found May in the wings. She was actually applauding, something he had never seen her do for any student. And in that moment, with the audience on their feet and his strict professor beaming with pride, Tom finally understood what his grandmother had tried to tell him years ago. Music wasn't about perfect technique or impressive credentials. It was about having something to say and the courage to say it, one note at a time. Spring sunshine streamed through the tall windows of the Westfield Conservatory Auditorium, where a small crowd had gathered for the end-of-year student showcase. 6 months had passed since the Donor Gala, and much had changed. Tom sat in the audience, watching a first-year student perform a piece he had helped her prepare. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably another email from his advisor about graduation requirements. With only a month left until he received his computer science degree, there were countless details to finalize. "Is this seat taken?" a familiar voice asked. Tom looked up to see Professor Wong standing in the aisle. He quickly moved his backpack. "Not at all." May sat down beside him as the young pianist on stage finished her piece. Everyone applauded, Tom clapping enthusiastically for his student. "She's improved tremendously," May noted, nodding toward the stage. "Your teaching is paying off." Tom smiled. "I just show her what you showed me." After the gala performance, Tom's life had taken an unexpected turn. Several donors had approached him at the reception, including the chairman of the conservatory's board, who happened to be a technology executive with connections in both the music and computing worlds. Within weeks, Tom had been offered a part-time position teaching introductory piano at the conservatory while he finished his degree. He'd also been invited to give small recitals at local venues, and even began working on an app that used artificial intelligence to help beginning piano students learn proper hand positioning. "How's the application process going?" May asked as they watched the next student take the stage. Tom shrugged. "I submitted everything last week. Now it's just waiting to hear back." With David Levine's encouragement, Tom had applied for a special dual program at the Manhattan School of Music, one that would allow him to pursue advanced piano studies while also developing music technology applications. It was the perfect bridge between his two passions. "They'd be fools not to accept you," May said with uncharacteristic certainty. "I don't know about that. It's pretty competitive." "So is the Donor Gala, and you conquered that." May checked her watch. "Speaking of which, the board announced the fall program yesterday. They want you back, you know. This time as a featured performer, not a replacement." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "Are you serious?" Completely. Apparently, 3 donors specifically requested you. One of them called you refreshingly authentic. She said this last part with a small smile, as if amused by the description. Wow, I don't know what to say. Say yes, it's good exposure, and the timing works with your fall semester, assuming you're in New York by then. Tom nodded, still processing this news. What about you? I heard rumors you might be leaving Westfield. It was May's turn to look surprised. Where did you hear that? Lily mentioned something. She said the Juilliard School reached out to you. May shook her head. Gossip spreads too quickly around here. Yes, they offered me a position, but I turned it down. You turned down Juilliard? Why? May gazed thoughtfully at the stage, where a violinist was now performing. I've been at Westfield for 15 years. I used to think the prestige of the institution was what mattered, that teaching at a place like Juilliard would somehow validate my career choices. She paused, then continued more quietly. But this past year reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. It's not about the name on the building. It's about those rare moments when you connect with a student who makes you see music through fresh eyes. Tom felt his face grow warm. I think that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Professor Wong. Don't let it go to your head, she replied, but her expression remained soft. Besides, I've accepted a different kind of offer. Starting next fall, I'll be department chair here at Westfield. That's amazing. Congratulations. Thank you. I have some ideas for changes. Her eyes had that determined look Tom had come to know well, including a new program that bridges music and technology. I might need your input once you've gotten some experience in New York. I'd be honored, Tom said, genuinely touched by her confidence in him. As the showcase continued, Tom noticed Lily enter the auditorium. She spotted them and walked over. Room for one more? She asked, surprisingly friendly. Tom moved his coat from the empty seat beside him. Of course. Their relationship had changed dramatically after the gala. Lily had approached him the very next day, not with her usual condescension, but with genuine questions about his self-taught methods. They'd ended up talking for hours, and over the following months, they had developed a cautious friendship built on mutual respect. Did you tell him about the award? Lily asked Professor Wong. May shook her head. I was getting to that. What award? Tom looked between them. The conservatory is starting a new scholarship, May explained. For students who show exceptional promise but come from non-traditional backgrounds. The board is naming it after your grandmother. Tom stared at her in disbelief. The Lin Chen Memorial Scholarship. How did you? I might have mentioned her story to a few key donors, May said, about how she was a concert pianist in China who never got the recognition she deserved after immigrating, and how she passed her knowledge and passion to her grandson, who continues her legacy. Tom felt a lump form in his throat. He looked down, blinking rapidly. The first scholarship will be awarded next fall, Lily added gently. They asked if you would perform at the ceremony. I'd like that, Tom managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. She would have liked that too. The 3 of them sat in comfortable silence as the showcase continued. Tom thought about the journey of the past 6 months, from being laughed at in his first piano class to finding a path that honored both sides of himself, the logical computer scientist and the passionate musician. He thought about all the late nights in practice rooms, the grueling sessions with Professor Wong, the nerve-wracking performances, and the countless hours of coding his music education app. None of it had been easy, but all of it had been right. You know, Tom said quietly, my grandmother used to tell me that everyone has music inside them. Some people just need help finding it. Wise woman, May remarked. She also said that sometimes the most important performances aren't on big stages with fancy pianos. They're the ones where you show people who you really are. May nodded thoughtfully. I think I would have liked your grandmother. She would have liked you too, Tom said, though she might have told you to smile more during lessons. To his surprise, Professor Wong actually laughed, a warm, genuine sound that turned a few heads in the audience. As the spring sunlight continued to stream through the windows and music filled the auditorium, Tom realized something important. 6 months ago, he had been living half a life, keeping his passion hidden away in midnight practice sessions. Now, both halves of himself had found harmony. And it had all started because someone had finally taken the time to listen, not just to his playing, but to the music he carried inside all along.